All right, so have you ever like had one of those like tech things go wrong and it just spirals out of control? You know, you send the wrong text or accidentally hit reply all. It's awkward, right? Well, imagine that, but at the level of national security. That's kind of what we're diving into today. It's this really strange story where the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, somehow ends up in this private Signal group chat. And this chat is full of senior Trump administration officials, and they're talking about pretty serious stuff, like plans for airstrikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen.
Yeah, it's crazy how this tiny digital slip-up just blew up into this huge thing. And it really touches on everything from, how the White House communicates all the way to the super tense relationship between the administration and the press. So today we're going to try to break this whole thing down. Like, how exactly did this happen? What happened immediately after? And what does it tell us about how people communicate when the stakes are so high? We've got a bunch of sources that lay out the timeline, who the key players are, and, all the different viewpoints on this really weird incident.
Yeah, and this is, for you, the listener, the big takeaway is, how can something that seems so helpful, like a simple feature on your phone, actually become this big security risk?
Exactly.
So for all our listeners out there who want to get all the important details quickly without getting totally lost in the weeds, we're going to unpack this one step at a time. We're going to point out the most important stuff and some of the surprising things that happened so, you can really understand what went down.
So how did a journalist like Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, end up in this top secret digital space?
Well, it all starts back in the fall of 2024, most likely in October. Jeffrey Goldberg, remember, he's the top guy at The Atlantic. He sends an email to the Trump campaign, right? And he's asking for their comment on the story they're about to publish. It's a story that's critical of President Trump's attitude toward wounded service members.
Right, so this is like the editor of a major publication reaching out. Yeah, exactly. And the campaign's reaction, well, that's what kind of kicked off this whole thing. They decide, okay, let's get Mike Waltz involved. Waltz was a national security surrogate for the campaign. He was the guy they wanted to push back against Goldberg's article. And then there's this guy, Stephen Chung, a campaign staffer, who's also in the mix early on.
Right, so they want to get Waltz in the loop to respond to Goldberg, right?
Right. And so to get Waltz up to speed, Trump's spokesperson, Brian Hughes, he does something that seems totally normal. He copies Goldberg's entire email, including the signature with his phone number, and pastes it into a text message and sends it to Mike Waltz. And this, totally ordinary thing. This was the first domino to fall.
Right, so that's important, right? Waltz gets this text from Hughes with Goldberg's contact info. And this sets off something on Waltz's iPhone, a feature called and I'm reading here from our sources, a contact suggestion update. Basically what happens is, the phone's algorithm, it sees this new number coming from Hughes, and it wrongly connects it to Waltz's existing contact for Brian Hughes. It thinks, oh, this new number came from Brian, it must be another way to reach him. Now, what's interesting is that it doesn't seem like Waltz actually called Goldberg at this point.
Right. Just to be clear on the timeline, on October 22nd, 2024, Mike Waltz goes on CNN. He's there to defend Trump on the very issue that Goldberg is asking about. And this is all happening after that initial contact mix-up on Waltz's phone. So it seems like things went back to normal for a while. Waltz was communicating with the real Brian Hughes, and there weren't any problems.
Okay, so you're saying they're talking as usual, no confusion, all seems normal.
Yeah, it seems that way.
But that seed of the error was already planted.
Right.
And now we fast forward to early March 2025. Waltz is in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and he needs to start this Signal group chat, a secure channel, right?
Right.
He wants to talk about some really sensitive stuff plans for airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen. And the plan is to bring Brian Hughes, his spokesperson, into this chat.
And here's a moment where everything goes sideways, right?
Oh.
It's March 13th, 2025. Waltz is setting up this Signal group chat, and according to reports, it's called Houthi PC Small Group. And when he goes to add Brian Hughes, he accidentally picks the contact that now has Goldberg's number in it. It's still saved under Brian Hughes in his phone. And you know what's crazy? One of our sources is that Signal might have even flagged the number, identified it as JG, but nobody on the Trump national security team, nobody noticed. This is a super small private chat meant for high-level U.S. officials to talk about classified military operations.
So just to be totally clear, this wasn't like some big public forum.
Yep, not at all.
This was a tight-knit group, and Goldberg, well, he was just there.
Right, just dropped right in.
And then on March 24th, 2025, the story breaks. Jeffrey Goldberg writes about how he got added to this private Signal group chat completely out of the blue. And soon after, people in the Trump administration confirmed that, yeah, the chat is real. It's kind of mind-blowing how a simple email could lead to all this.
It's wild, right?
Totally wild.
So our sources really point to this one thing, the iPhone auto-suggest feature. It's described as this algorithm that basically connects a new unknown number to an existing contact if it thinks there's a link. And in this case, that text message from Hughes to Waltz with Goldberg's number, that was the trigger, and that's what caused this wrong connection.
And the fact that Signal might have even flagged the number, like it popped up as JG, but nobody on Trump's team saw it, or if they saw it, they didn't think anything of it, that really shows you how a small detail can slip through the cracks, especially when you're dealing with such sensitive communication. I mean, you think they would be super careful about who they add to a chat like that?
You would think so, right? It makes you wonder what kind of checks and balances were in place. It raises some serious questions about how carefully they were vetting people before adding them to these super secure chats. But there's another big thing to think about. Why were they using Signal for this kind of sensitive communication in the first place?
Right. It's a good question. Why Signal? It's not exactly known for being the most secure platform for government stuff, top secret stuff.
Right, and that's a good point. Our sources suggest that the Trump White House allowed people to use Signal mainly because they didn't have another platform for real-time communication between different government agencies. And this problem apparently had been around since the previous administration. And even under Biden, they hadn't come up with a better solution. So even though Signal does have encryption, using something that's basically designed for everyday people for conversations about this kind of sensitive stuff, it's just inherently risky.
I see. So you're saying there were other more secure options, but they weren't practical for everyday use.
Exactly.
And then, on top of that, we have this detail that Mike Waltz's team was using Signal like a lot. They had at least 20 different Signal chats just for national security work. So they were heavily relying on this method of communication.
Right. And it gets you thinking, right? Were there specific concerns about Signal security beyond just accidentally adding someone? Like, could someone really skilled hacky into these chats?
It's a good point. It's definitely worth considering.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fallout. What happened when everyone found out about Goldberg being in the chat?
You can just imagine the scene at the White House. Total chaos, right? They found out about it when The Atlantic reached out to them before they published Goldberg's story. And you know what they did? They immediately launched this internal forensic review. They wanted their IT guys to figure out how this happened. How did the security breach, even if it was an accident, how did it happen?
And how did President Trump react to all of this?
Well, reportedly, he was furious. I mean, really angry. Especially because it was Goldberg, the editor of a publication he's always criticizing, who had access to these conversations. And for a while, they even thought about firing Mike Waltz. But in the end, they decided not to. Sources say Trump was more bothered about who got access rather than how they got access. Which is kind of interesting, right? It makes you think about their priorities. Like, was it more important to them to control the information, or was it more about their relationship with the media?
Yeah, it's definitely a telling detail.
It is. So after all that, they actually defended Waltz publicly. There are pictures of them together on Marine One with Susie Wiles and Sergio Gore. Like, they wanted everyone to know they still supported him.
Interesting. And then, as we've already talked about, the internal investigation wrapped up their conclusion. It was an accident, all because of the iPhone's contact suggestion glitch. And they said Waltz didn't do it on purpose. And get this, they also said there was no record of any direct communication between Waltz and Goldberg or between Hughes and Goldberg before Goldberg's initial email to the campaign. So it really does seem like a totally random chain of events.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It is. But the story doesn't end there, does it? The whole narrative around the relationship between Waltz and Goldberg, it kind of took a turn, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. So Waltz comes out and says, listen, I've never met this guy, never talked to him, nothing. And then on Fox News, he even suggests that Goldberg's number somehow got sucked into his phone. But then Jeffrey Goldberg is asked for a comment, and he keeps it short, just confirms that he knows Waltz and has talked to him before, but he won't say anything more about their relationship. So their stories don't really match up.
Yeah, there's definitely some discrepancy there.
There is. But even setting that aside, this whole thing raises a lot of questions about security. Even if Signal is encrypted, someone who isn't supposed to be there ending up in a conversation about active military operations. I mean, that's a problem. It just makes you question how secure these conversations really are and whether the information is staying private.
Right. It definitely exposes some vulnerabilities. And we can't forget the political side of this, right? This became a really big deal, especially with the already bad relationship between the Trump administration and some media outlets. It's like this perfect storm of a tech mess up and existing political tension.
Yeah, it was a recipe for disaster.
It really was. You know, one of our sources actually had a pretty funny take on all of this. It's an article by Anthony Lane called Mixed Signals. He uses these made-up historical situations to show how communication errors can happen even in the most important moments.
It's true. It was actually a pretty clever way to look at the whole situation. It takes these big historical events, the Trojan Horse, the sack of Rome, Pearl Harbor, and it reimagines them as if these communication breakdowns and accidental inclusions were happening back then.
It's hilarious. So picture this. The Trojan Horse. Odysseus and his men are hiding inside, trying to stay quiet. And then this one guy, Hexethus, starts neighing like he's trying to sound like a horse. It's this absurd detail that just shows how even in a top secret mission, things can go wrong in the most unexpected and potentially disastrous ways.
Right. And then there's the sack of Rome, right? Alaric has this spy, Hexagoth, who's just kind of shady. Lane plays it for laughs, with Alaric more focused on Hexagoth's flashy handkerchief than on, whether the guy is actually trustworthy or not. And then, when they're planning the attack on Pearl Harbor, there's petty officer second-class Hexathawa, messing up the flag signals. And he's also identified by this ridiculous detail, a rising sun handkerchief, top pocket.
Right. It's so funny. And the point is, these mistakes, they aren't new. They've been happening throughout history, even in the most crucial moments. So maybe this signal chat mix-up isn't this huge, unprecedented security crisis that some people are making it out to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. It definitely gives some perspective.
It does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways for our listeners?
Well, the bottom line is this whole thing was a combination of technology and human error. It started with a simple iPhone feature, someone forwarded an email, and months later, boom, a journalist ends up in a chat about highly sensitive national security plans. It just shows how even the smallest glitches can have huge consequences, especially in these high-stakes situations.
And for you, our listeners, the really crazy thing is how easily this all happened. An email leads to a journalist being in a secret military planning chat months later. It's almost hard to believe.
It is, and it really makes you think, what does this tell us about how our personal tech is mixing with government operations? How do we keep things secure in a world where algorithms can accidentally connect people who should never be connected? And are these readily available apps, like Signal, even though they have encryption, are they safe enough for these kinds of sensitive conversations? Or are they just an accident waiting to happen?
Right. These are important questions, especially when you think about those funny historical examples. It makes you wonder, is this signal chat thing just a modern version of mistakes that have always been happening? Or is it something new, something more dangerous because of how fast and far digital communication can reach? It's something we're thinking about, how technology is changing the way governments work and keep us safe.
Exactly.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.